here is the question. But before I even get into that question, I want to say a little something about last week and what we're doing for this whole month. I wanted to give you some episodes in what we call the Old Testament on the first two lessons. That's why I did Genesis and the very first verse. And I really only covered three words. I covered the meaning of the word God. I covered the meaning of the word create, not too deeply, but enough. And all of that's involved and what is God and all that. We did all of that last week, and I still only scratched the surface with it when I presented last week. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to go to different areas in the Old Testament to show you what we have absolutely misunderstood. And this is the reason why people are turned off by the scriptures. They're turned off by it because people who generally teach on the scriptures, now I'm speaking in a general term, not everyone, but in a general term, they have an axe to grind. They have a belief to shove down your throat. They have something that they're after when they're doing it, rather than just the scriptures themselves, because the scriptures are a spiritual book. But we have to remember that this book came, that is, from people who lived in a desert area. It was a desert area. We call it, the three religions, we call it, the major ones, the one God one, we call it Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But all these three are desert spiritual wisdom. That's what you have to understand. The scripture gives us spiritual wisdom. It is wisdom, but it's spiritual wisdom, something that we need. And that's why this book, you can never kill this book or get away with it, because it has spiritual life in it. And this is what Jesus was talking about. Man cannot live, as a human being, cannot live by bread alone, by just the food, by materialism. He has to have what proceeds from the mouth of God, which is spiritual wisdom, spiritual understanding, spiritual enlightenment. And that's what the Bible does. But we haven't heard that. All we've heard was dogma, doctrine, and you have to bow to it, and you have to bend to it. And if you don't, you're in trouble. They threaten us with it. As I always tell my ministerial students, the three C's. We're not here to convince, coerce, or convert. I call them my three C's. That's what I teach all my ministerial students, regardless of what their background may be. We're not here to convince, convert, or coerce. We love to coerce, and we coerce by threatening. And not only in religion, they do it in politics, they do it in all kinds of things. They love to threaten us because if you don't follow it, something terrible is going to happen to you. So, no, that's not what we're teaching here. This is why we call it the Aramaic School of Light. The first major, big school of light in Aramaic was done on the Silk Road. Now, you have to know the ancient story of the ancient Silk Road. And it was established in a school. It was called Edessa, and that was in ancient Mesopotamia. In fact, we don't even realize it, but Christianity went east, and all the Christianity we know here in the West is everything that went west. That is, went north and then went west into Rome, into Greece, and then all the way on up into our Western world. We don't know much about the Christianity that went east, that went into and established metropolitan sees, Christian sees all over the East, all over, and all the way from the Mediterranean Sea to China. We don't get to hear much of that history. All we get is Western history, and that's where the theology developed. That's where all this other heavy doctrine and dogma developed. And we lost the simplicity. This is the question that was asked, and I wanted to start with that before we go into some more of the Old Testament. It says here, I'm interested to know more about how Christ's teachings were turned into dogma, and when they were initially meant as philosophy. Well, first of all, I didn't say that exactly like that. What I'm saying is that the real meaning of Judaism and even of what we call Christianity, they didn't call it Christianity in those days. It was a movement under Jesus of Nazareth. And then it got the name Christendom, because when it went into the Western world, it got Christendom for Christian, and then later on it became known as Christianity, but I call it churchianity. And Jesus didn't come to establish churches. He came, and I know that the word is used there in the New Testament, because when I make statements like that, I'm able to back it up. That word that's been translated as church means congregation. And that is really what it is. It's the hearts and minds of people. That's what a real church is. It's not a building. It's the hearts, minds, and souls of the people. So when I said that it was a philosophy means a lover of wisdom. That's why I mentioned earlier that the Bible really is spiritual wisdom. And that's what Judaism was. And later on, when ritualism was introduced, you have to understand it was a progression in Judaism. And I'm going to be speaking about what I'm going to get into right now, into what we call the Old Testament. Remember, they don't call their Bible the Old Testament. And it's a name we gave it. And then we put the books of the New Testament, and we call it New Testament. But really, it's spiritual wisdom, and that's philosophy. Spiritual, that guides us, that helps us. And so that's the meaning of it here when I said a philosophy. And Jesus continued, he backed up his teachings by the prophets. He was a continuation of the prophecy. And he said, I didn't come to destroy or weaken or loosen the Torah. He didn't come to do that. And that was the main philosophy. And that main philosophy we call the Torah. The Torah doesn't mean just law. It's too bad it was translated that way, the law. That word Torah carries the notion of instruction, teaching. That's what it teaches. That's it. So it's ancient wisdom put in for our whole life. That's what that was for. So we would have a holistic life, not just a one-sided life, not just materialism, but we would have a combination of materialism and wholesome spiritual life. We're a combination of both. So this is what I meant by that. And his teachings, what we did is we focused on the man, and his teachings got buried. We focused on the man, how much of him was God, and they began to fight over how much of Jesus was God, how much God was in him, how much wasn't God in him. Was he a human being, or was he a spirit floating around? All this began to develop towards the end of the first century and into the second and third, fourth century. Became a mess. And then when Constantine got a hold of it, then doctrines were established, and we lost the flow of the teachings of Jesus. And that's why I wanted to get into it. And now I want to get back to where it was originally, how it came originally. And we have to go. I know I just did the first chapter of Genesis, and I know there's so much more there. I only did verse 1. I didn't go into the whole thing, because when we fully get the Aramaic School of Light in full swing, which will be February of 2021, we are going to establish it fully. I'll have several things going. When that takes place, I'll go back to Genesis, and I'll teach you more in depth about Genesis. And I will also do the story of Eden, because we misunderstand that terribly. The story of Eden has put a curse on us because we did not understand it according to the context in which it comes to us. We always put our own interpretation on it, and we condemn people with it, And we even created a doctrine called original sin. And no Jewish person ever heard of original sin except that Christians teach it. And coming from their story of Eden. So you see, there is no such thing as original sin. But I don't want to get into that teaching. That we're going to reserve for our class on when we open up the school in full swing in February. And you'll get notices of it in January, so to prepare yourself for it. Okay, where I'd like to go now is, of all things, I'm going to skip over the first 11 chapters of Genesis. And we're going to go into the story of course, Abraham. That's how we pronounce it in Aramaic, Abraham, or Avraham, either way. Abraham is what we say in English. And he is the one, he had a simple understanding of life, of God, and he had no priesthood, no ecclesiastical buildings to go to. He lived in a tent. And the thing is, God came to him in his dreams and in his insight. And he lived in a tent and looked like everyone else. And he became the head man of the tent. And he had lots of people under him. And he had men fighting him. At least he had 200 to 300 families under him when he was traveling in the East. Where did this all start? In the ancient Near East, even the word God, which I went into Elohim, where it came from. I also went into the word in Aramaic, Allah, and what it meant as our prime existence. But the word that was used more simply, and the one that Abraham used, was the simple word called El, E-L. But in Aramaic and in Hebrew, it's spelled with an aleph and a lamed, A-L. That's how we really do it. Aleph changes sounds. That's why they shortened it and made it El, just L in Hebrew, but we say El in Aramaic. And then later on, when we used Allah, then the Arabs shortened it to Allah, Allah, Allah. But it all comes from this simple 2 little letters, E-L, but aleph and lamed. And A-L is what we really would have it. But the little dots under it changed the sound a little bit. So the God of the Canaanites, where Abraham was heading to, the God of the Canaanites, the God of the land right there by the Mediterranean Sea, and also in Syria, but it wasn't called Syria in those days. It was called Aram. And in that whole area, the God was Elohim, and he also shortened it to El, E-L, and they also used the full term for E-L is Eloah. Eloah is how they say that, the full name. And then when you make it plural, you say Elohim, or you can shorten it just plain El. And that was the word, the name of the deity. But when the Hebrews used it, they just used it as a general term for deity. And where did all this start? We have to start with Abraham. Abraham came, according to Scripture, now I'm just telling you according to Scripture. Abraham came from southern Iraq, from a very famous ancient city called Ur. And it's in the southern Iraq, just below Baghdad. It's in ruins today. If you were to go there and venture into that area, you can see some of the ruins of that famous ancient city. His whole family, his father Tira is the way we say it in English, Tira. When he was there in Ur, he decided to leave Ur And of course, there's stories, all kinds of legends about why he decided to leave with Abraham. Abraham was Terah's first son. He had two other boys. Now, he could have had girls, but they're not mentioned in the scripture at all. But he had three sons. The oldest one was called Abram. That's short for Abraham. And the next son also had a name. And then the third son, the reason why I'm holding up, because that son didn't do anything. It was the third son, Haran, who had a family also. But he died early, and he had a son by the name of Lot. And because Abraham was the firstborn son, he took care of Lot and Lot's family, and also his brother Haran. And Nahor, the one I didn't mention, the second son, it was Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And these three boys came from Terah. But it was to Abram, the firstborn boy of Terah, that he started having dreams. And in the dreams, God came to him. And this is where it starts. They were first in Ur, southern Iraq, and Terah decided to bring his whole family north, to go north. You have to picture the map. I'm way in the South Iraq, below Baghdad, and the Euphrates River is along this line here, and above it is the Tigris. And that whole land in that area, especially when you go north, is all called ancient Mesopotamia, or in Aramaic we call it Beth Nacharim. And it means the land of the rivers. And it was fertile, but it was desert too, but it was fertile. And what we call, I know some of them may not like what I'm going to say now, but they have discovered that the special garden that was always attributed to Babylon, they're saying now it was not in Babylon, but it was in Assyria. And they've discovered all kinds of things, and I don't want to teach you what archaeology has discovered, but just to give you an idea. So the hanging gardens of Babylon were really the hanging gardens in Assyria. And this is done by scholars that have nothing to do with the particular races or Assyria or Babylon. They just discovered it was a woman archaeologist. And I've seen tapes on it. I've seen all kinds of things on it. It's fabulous. So what happened is, that is Terah's family, and Abraham and his other two sons, they all went northward. Now, whether they traveled by boat on the Euphrates all the way north, we don't know. It doesn't say. They could have traveled by caravan all the way going north. And then they crossed over the river Euphrates. And when they crossed over the river Euphrates, these Semitic people were then called Hebrew. That's where they get the name Hebrew, because they crossed the Euphrates. Abraham did, and his father and his brothers and all the families crossed over and went into the northern western part of ancient Mesopotamia, or Beth Naharim. And in there is where Terah settled. But Abraham, when he was there, had a dream, because they thought, well, maybe one day he'll return to his place of nativity, which was probably Ur. But he had a dream, and that is in the 12th chapter of Genesis. This is where it really starts. This is where the unfolding of consciousness begins. It begins with a dream. And in those days, dreams were considered visions. They also had, and when they would doze in the afternoon, that was also, they would have visions. Dreams were called visions because they're seeing things. That's why they call visions, something you're seeing. And so in this particular one, which made it outstanding, is God appeared to Abraham. Really, it was Abram at that time. And he tells him to leave. Let me go to it right here. I love it because this is where it all starts. He says, now the writer here, when this was written, the writer includes the name of God, which is Yahweh. Now Yahweh said to Abram, depart from your country and from the place of your nativity and from your father's house, your family, your father's family. Let me tell you, you may not think much of this because God's saying it to him, but let me tell you, to leave in those days, family was number one. Your father's family, the place of, they already left, and now they're in Haran, which is in northern Mesopotamia on the west side of the Euphrates. And to hear this, we don't think anything of it. Depart from your country. I want you to leave the northwestern area of Mesopotamia. I'm going to guide you somewhere. You're to leave it. And not thinking about going back to the place of your nativity. And from your father's family. And you're to leave this to a land that I will show you. He didn't even tell him where he was going to go. I will guide you. I will show you. And isn't that just like life? We don't exactly know where we're going to go, but you have faith and trust. And this is the simple faith of Abraham. Not in any particular belief system. Where was his faith? His faith was in his dream. His faith was in his night vision. That's where the spirituality starts. It starts right there in the imagination. Remember, the power to imagine is a spiritual faculty. We have this faculty. It's a spiritual faculty. The power to imagine. So in this dream, Yahweh said to, and it's the writer puts the name in here, Yahweh. But it's God appeared to Abram. And he tells him this, to a land that I will show you. Just leave. Get up and leave. Leave family, leave all your ties, everything you know, just go. And I can imagine, it's not written what happened, but probably when he told his father, and when he told his brother, and when he told his nephew, Lot, that it must have been a shock to all of them for him. And they're going to say to him, well, where are you going to go? What are you going to do? He said, I don't know. This is what I dreamed. This is what I saw. This is what I heard. And I'm going. And Lot joins with him. His nephew joins in with him. Well, because he was the firstborn son of Terah, so he naturally would join in with him and go with him. But listen to the rest of it. And I will make of you a great people, and I will bless you and make your name great, which he has. Or even Jesus talked about that he was returning to the religion of Abraham. So it's of the three, it all stems from Abraham and his simple faith in a dream, in a vision of the night. And he goes on to say, I will bless I will bless you and make your name great, and you will be a blessing. Now, something else that most people do not realize. But when we think of blessing, we think of a priest blessing us. We think of different ones blessing us. But in the ancient world, your parents bless you. We always think of it just as the right of a priest, the right of a religious person to bless you, but not in the ancient Near East. In the ancient Near East, blessing was passed on by the family. They always wanted the blessing of the family, the blessing of the father, the blessing of the mother, the blessing of the brother, the blessing of the sister. We don't have that today. Brother, how many have brothers? Do we ever ask our brothers or our sisters, will you bless me? We figure, well, what that right do they have to bless? But in the ancient Near East, they were still closer to the earth, closer to spiritual verities. We have lost that connection. The trouble with us here in the West is we live in concrete. We don't live in nature. We live in concrete. And we're so busy in concrete and in entertainment, which I'm glad we have entertainment. I'm talking against entertainment, but we have entertainment that dulls us. And because we're living in constant concrete, it also dulls us. I'm talking about cities and little and little towns and little hamlets and stuff like that. Everything is concreted. We get in cars. Whereas before, when we got on horses, we had a relationship with horses. They were animals that we loved. They were animals that we rode. They were animals we took care of. The only animals we have now are cats and dogs, except some people like to have snakes and all those other things. That's not, and then we put them in an environment that they don't belong. They don't belong there. But here in the East, when a brother blessed a brother, it felt good. When a mother and father blessed their sons and their daughters, it was good. When daughters blessed each other, when sons blessed each other, it was good. They did not want to incur bad thoughts from the family. Can you imagine asking? We always think of it just as a priest doing it, or thinking of it as just as a minister doing it. Well, you bless me, no. Parents bless the children. Now I'm talking about the ancient world. They did it a lot in the ancient world. And we've lost touch with that. And this is why God is speaking to Abraham. The reason I'm telling you the culture behind it is this is the reason why in the dream, he's dreaming of the deity saying to him, the Eloha, is saying to him, I'm going to show you a land where you're to go. I will make of you a great people. I will bless you. He had to hear that. I will bless you. And no doubt, it's not recorded here, but knowing the Eastern custom, when Abraham got ready to leave, and when all of them got ready to go to say goodbye, they had to bless Abraham. They all had to bless him. And because to have a safe journey, to stay healthy, to do all that, that was coming from the family. I bless you. I bless you. Mm-hmm. You have the power to bless in your family. That didn't change. Just because they did it in the ancient world doesn't mean it doesn't happen today. You have the power to bless your children. You have the power to bless even when they get to be adults. And I don't care how old they are, you have that power to bless them. You have it. It was always given you, but we lost touch with it. We think only holy people could do it, priests or special people. So this is why God says to him, I will bless you. He had to hear that in his dream from the deity. I will bless you and make your name great. Means known. Your name will be known. And you will be a blessing. Your very nature, everything you do, everything you teach will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. It will be a double blessing. If Abraham blesses them, then God will bless them. But he says, and curse those who curse you. And that's just something else they do in the Near East. When they get angry or things are bad, they will put a curse on you. Cursing you means to put a curse on you. May you not have children. May you lose everything you have. May you no longer have a tent. May your bones rot. May you become, this is what they call cursing. And why Abraham had to hear that is that when he heard this in his vision and in his dream, What that means is that those who are putting a curse on you, it will come on them. I will curse those who curse you. God is not up there putting curses on people. People, when we put a curse on others and make curses, it has to be generated by that person who's doing it. Anything you send out as a curse doesn't have the power that the one who created it. So the damage is done inwardly when you curse. I'm not saying a curse word. I'm saying putting a curse on people. And if you have that constantly, it eats in you. The curse comes back on you. God doesn't put a curse on anyone. But this is how Abraham heard it. This is how he understood it. In other words, when he heard, I will curse those who curse you, it simply meant, I will protect you. I will protect you. That's all it means. So Abram did. Now here it is. He had faith in it. So Abram did as Yahweh had spoken to him in his dream. And Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old. You know, sometimes you have to wait for a long while before your intuition and spiritual understanding awakens. In fact, really, this series that I'm going to be doing on the Aramaic School of Light, I really call it Inner Awakenings from an Ancient Language. And Abram, no doubt he was worshiping God, especially being coming from Ur. But now he opened up spiritually. He's gotten guidance. His soul began to blossom, and it came by a simple dream. He wasn't in any holy place. He was in his bedroll and sleeping, and it came to him. This is why they were great believers in dreams and visions. The ancient people believed very strong in dreams and visions. And this is what happened. Then Abram took Sarai, his wife, and Lot, his brother's son, and all their possessions which they had gained, and the persons they had gotten. In other words, when they were traveling and settled in Haran, they got built up. They became semi-nomadic. And now that Abraham is leaving, he's definitely he was no longer staying settled in Haran, and he's becoming semi-nomadic, but he's getting a tribal people. He's accumulated other persons with him. And by the time he does settle in the lower parts of Canaan, the land of Canaan, which today we call Palestine, but it was the lower parts of Canaan, that's when he had a large family. In fact, he had a soldier of men. He had about 200 or 300 men with him that he could rescue his nephew Lot, because a war broke out in Canaan, tribal wars. They were tribal wars, not a war like we think of, but they were tribal. And so Abram had to rescue his nephew Lot, and he had 200 or 300 men who fought for him, because he was the head man of these 10 people who were with him that raised sheep and all this, and they also weaved all kinds of things. They made all kinds of things. These people that were becoming semi-nomadic, they wanted rugs, they wanted all kinds of things that they used for inside their tents or inside some of the buildings that they made that was made of clay and stuff. So this is where it begins. The simple faith of Abraham. And this is why, now I'm going to tell you something else here. What was in his soul began to manifest. This didn't come from the sky. It came from the consciousness of Abraham. In other words, when Moses was on Mount Sinai and he saw a bush on fire, which was Moses' vision, and he saw this bush on fire, and the angel standing on the bush, but the bush didn't get burned up, it didn't get consumed, but it was on fire, and he saw this messenger on that burning bush. And he asks, and he has a conversation with him. And he says, "Who are you?" He says, "I am the God of Abraham. I am the God of Isaac. I am the God of Jacob." Abraham, the God of, I am the God of the soul of Abraham. I am the God of the soul, the consciousness, the being. That word soul means consciousness, being of Abraham, of Isaac, and Jacob. In other words, the sacred place of God was the corridor of the souls of these men, which leads me to this. In every human being, I don't care who they are, or what, and maybe they're even doing things wrong, but they don't know it. They possess the secret treasures of heaven on earth. They possess the sacred place. You know what makes a place sacred? The people who go there and make it sacred. A stone is just a stone. A place is just a place. What makes it sacred is the sacredness of your own being. So you see, the Native Americans here in America knew that a long time ago about the sacredness of being. Your inner self is the most sacred church in the world. The most holy place is your own being and your own sacred self. Most people don't realize this. They think, oh, I got to go out there, I got to go there, I got to go here, I got to go somewhere else. But here, this is what you got to understand. This is what it's talking about. See, we read the scriptures too surfacely. We don't read the depth that is there, the understanding that is there. Oh, we just think, oh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And same thing with Jewish people. He's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And because I come from that lineage, then I'm something. No. What makes you something is God resides in every human being, even the ones we don't like. But of course, whether they're awake to it or not is something else. Abraham, at age 75, awake to this wonderful, marvelous, sacred place of his own heart and soul. We use the word heart and soul, but his own inner being. I like the word we usually translate as soul comes from the Aramaic and Hebrew word. The Aramaic we say nausha. And in Hebrew, and by the way, it's spelled the same way. If I were to use the actual Semitic letters, it's the same identical Semitic letters. Because Hebrew, Aramaic, except for Arabic, Arabic flowered more, but the basis of Arabic comes from the Aramaic language and the basic alphabet, which was Aramaic, of 22 letters. So when they spelled the word soul, whether I spell it in Hebrew or I spell it in Aramaic, it's going to be the same 3 letters. It's just going to be pronounced differently. I will say nausha for Aramaic, and I will say nephesh for Hebrew. But what it means is the inner self, the inner being. Man became a living, the way we translated it the first time in Genesis, when God breathed into man a living soul, but it should be living being or a living self. That is, your breath is sacred. This is why the Hindu people use breath to get them to understand things spiritually. And you can take all kinds of classes on breath, but in the Bible, it's right there in the scriptures. It starts with the breath. Then it goes into, when you go to sleep, what happens? Your breath becomes easy, slow and easy. When what we're doing and working and everything, our breath is faster and quicker. But when we're fully sleeping and relaxed, this is why they could see those night visions. because the breath, that's the breath of God, the divine breath of God, the spiritual essence. We take our breath, we like to analyze it. Oh, so much oxygen. Oh, so much of this, so much of that in it. This is understanding it spiritually. I'll tell you, this is a spiritual book to help open us up, to give us inner awakenings. And when we get to the resurrection of Jesus, I'll even teach you more about that. What happens at death. I did a little bit of it last week. And I talked, that's one of the questions that was raised too, and I'm going to get to that too. So this is the secret of Abraham. Now we come to Moses. When we come to Moses, Moses gives the law. Now we have the word law. But the word Torah means Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. It's all the teachings, all the instructions, because it's the spiritual base. When we come to Moses, what he did was institutionalize a family religion. He institutionalized it. He made it. And he did it for a reason. You have to understand why. And the Ten Commandments, why the Ten Commandments came. The Ten Commandments came to unify these Eastern tribes, these Near Eastern tribes, even though they're all supposed to come from Israel, from Jacob and his 12 sons, they still were unique Eastern tribes. And let me tell you, for them to unite, they needed something powerful. And that's why Moses came on the scene and why he gave the law. But it legalized it, and it institutionalized it, but it slowly begins to lose something. And then he built a sanctuary. He built a tent that was just for the appearance of Yahweh in that tent. It was a tent, a special tent that had all, when we get into that, all these colorful things that were done in there, and the gold that was overlaid in there, and the incense and the candle, and what we call the bread of the presence, and the table of the presence, and then the ark of the covenant. All of that ritualism and institutionalizing it moved it slightly away from the simple understanding that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had. When Jacob pulled a real bad thing against his brother, he had to flee from his family, run from his family, because his brother could kill him, because he stole that special blessing, and had to flee all the way up into Aram. We went up into Syria, not Aleppo by the Mediterranean, but more of the northwest Iraq area, which was ancient Mesopotamia, and went up there into Aram. And in there, he married Aramean women. And so that's why Jacob was called a wandering Aramean. But he still was Semitic. And there, in other words, God went with him. When he was running from the thing he had done, and he was in Bethel, and that was a place of a god called El. That was the Canaanite god, El, E-L. And it was called the house of God, meaning the house of Bethel. Bethel means house of El. So, or El. And that was the Canaanite god. But he stayed there, and he slept there, and God appeared to him. And that's when he saw the golden steps. We always translate it as ladder, but it was the stairs. And I'm not going to explain to you all that has meaning, which when we open up the school fully, I'll go into more detail. I just want to give you a taste of what's here. And messengers were ascending and descending, ascending and descending. Every bit of that had special meaning, and it has special meaning for us today, just like when I read here. But when Moses came on the scene, it all changed. We lost that simplicity. We lost the sacredness of our own soul and put God outside of us. We put everything outside of us. We put holiness outside of us. We put God outside of us. We put God in the heavens somewhere instead of the heavens of your own being. We put it all out there. That's why, and when we're into the materialism puts God out there somewhere in the sky, and that's why I say, how come they don't see God when they travel in the sky? Because God is not seen materially. God is understood and seen spiritually. He's seen by the eyes of consciousness and not by these eyes, although it will superimpose on it and you can see images, which that's it. I'll get into all that when we go into more detail. And then you have the history of Israel. When they became kings, they rejected the judges. The judges were ruling over the people, and they didn't want judges anymore. They wanted kings like the other nations. And then they just had kings and prophets, and that's when the school of the prophets began to develop. And from the school of the prophets, we have Samuel, we have Elijah, we have Elisha, and we go to the major prophets, we go to the statesman Isaiah, we go to the priest Jeremiah, we go to the priest Ezekiel, and then we have Daniel, who was taken captive, as well as Ezekiel, into Chaldea, into Babylon. And then we have the other prophets who were shepherds, but they just opened up. All of this was preparing for the day when the marvelous Messiah would appear. Messiah means the anointed one. Later on, when it went into the Greek language, that word Messiah was dropped. Mashiach is Hebrew and Mashiach is Aramaic. And they both mean the same thing. Again, pronounced differently, but written the same way. And it means an anointed individual. In other words, a special anointing came on the person that coincided with what was on the inside of that person. It anointed the sacredness of that person. When people get anointed, they don't realize what they are anointing is the sacredness of that person. I know we anoint people into ministry and all that, but they don't understand what they're doing when they're doing it. When you anoint with the oil, you're bringing forth that special sacredness of that being, which he will contribute to people. He will be a blessing to people, or she will be a blessing to people. The sacredness of our own being, we don't know. I'd rather go to a sacred tree and hug a sacred tree. When the most sacred thing you can hug is another person. The most sacred thing you can feel is another person. God said, let's make humankind our image and our likeness. And I never explained that either, but I will with the school. And I want to get to your questions. And I know we only go to about 8:15. And last week we almost went to 8:30. So I want to get to your questions. And I'm going to get myself off the cloud right now. And Hanny, I'm going to